Thank you, Chair Kimball. Will the Committee on Governmental Relations please come to order? It's now time for the committee to consider today's consent agenda, which consists only of the minutes of the March 2022 meeting. Is there any objection to the approval of the minutes? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. The committee has one action item and one information item on today's discussion agenda. Item 2 is sponsored state legislation for 2022. This action item will be presented by Steve Relier, Executive Vice Chancellor and Chief Financial Officer, and Eric Bakke, Interim Assistant Vice Chancellor, Advocacy and State Relations. Take it away, Steve.
Thank you, Trustee Fagan, and thanks to everyone for putting your CSU construction vests on. Eric Bakke is going to talk a little bit about that later because there are going to be a lot of people in Sacramento wearing these vests in the near future. So as you recall, in our March Board of Trustees meeting, Executive Vice Chancellor Alva and her team presented an information item providing an overview of the types of doctoral programs that are currently offered by the CSU. Out of that discussion came the desire to explore options and ways in which the CSU could award the Doctor of Public Health degree. So here to discuss this item in more detail is Interim Assistant Vice Chancellor Eric Bakke. Eric?
Thank you, Steve. As Vice Chancellor Relier noted, the board received a presentation on the doctoral programs currently offered by the CSU, including a discussion on the need to offer a Doctor of Public Health degree. The pandemic has demonstrated that an expansion of highly trained, diverse professionals in the healthcare industry is crucial at this time. According to the California Future Health Work Commission report entitled Meeting the Demand for Health, the Commission notes that a robust and diverse health workforce is increasingly a matter of public health. A recent analysis evaluating employment data and the workforce needs in the public health sector found that employment in public health jobs requiring a bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees is expected to grow across all regions of the state and in all degree areas over the next 10 years. The demand for more public health professionals is likely to exceed even the predicted growth due to the ongoing pandemic. In order to meet the specific public health leadership needs in California, expanded degree offerings are crucial at this time. Should the board approve this action item, the first opportunity for the bill to be heard in committee will be next month, June. Since the March meeting, Academic and Student Affairs and Advocacy and State Relations have been performing their due diligence and working with our partners at the University of California and with the state legislature to lay the foundation for success. At this time, I present for your consideration our final proposed sponsored legislation for 2022, which seeks authorization for the state legislature to award the Doctor of Public Health degree. Trustee Fagan, that concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Steve and Eric, for your presentations. The sponsored state legislation for 2022 is an action item before the Committee on Governmental Relations. Before we proceed to any questions or comments, I have a motion from a committee member to approve the item. And is there a second?
Second.
And any discussion? So it appears there are no further questions or comments. There's been a motion and a second to approve the item. At this time, Ms. Matthews, please take a roll call vote.
Trustee Fagan.
Yes.
Trustee Reyes. Aye. Trustee Arambula.
Aye.
Trustee Clark. Trustee Furstenberg.
Aye.
Trustee Lopez.
Aye.
Trustee McGrory. Trustee Rodriguez.
Aye.
Trustee Sebalius.
Yes.
Trustee Simon.
Yes.
Chair Kimball.
Aye.
Interim Chancellor Kester.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you. The sponsored state legislation for 2022 is approved. Item 3 is a state legislative update. This information item will be presented by Steve Relier again and Eric Bakke.
Thank you, Trustee Fagan. But before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge Government Relations Committee Vice Chair Crystal Reyes and recognize her outstanding work and tremendous contributions in helping shape our legislative priorities. Now, as you know, this will be her last meeting as the vice chair of the committee, as her term ends soon. But in her year as vice chair, she used her voice to both publicly and privately ensure students' needs and priorities were always present in our legislative discussions. We're all very extremely grateful for the time you spent on this committee. Thank you, Trustee Ramos. So since the last meeting of the board, the advocacy and state relations team has been very busy. As you can see from the agenda, they continue to engage with legislative offices seeking amendments to problematic bills, supporting measures that benefit our students, and preparing for policy and fiscal committee hearings. They've also continued to execute the budget advocacy strategy for our year coming up. And as we enter the final weeks of the budget process, this advocacy strategy will be vital to our overall success. Interim Assistant Vice Chancellor Bakke will now provide an update on key legislative issues and highlight ongoing budget advocacy efforts in Sacramento. Eric.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Aurelia. I thought I would begin my presentation with a budget advocacy update. During my last presentation to you, I highlighted the collaborative budget advocacy efforts that we have implemented, and now we highlighted our three main messages: investments in graduation initiative, one-time funding for academic facilities and infrastructure improvements, and funding to provide fair and equitable compensation for our non-faculty employees. On the screen, you can see a leave behind that was created, which established the basis for our budget advocacy this year. Our team has been working with our strong advocacy partners, CSSA, CFA, CSU-EU, Teamsters, Academic Senate, and the Alumni Council to deliver a unified message. Each has held lobby days, spoken directly with members, and continued to make the case for why the state should invest in the CSU. Since our budget advocacy kickoff in February, we designated the months of March, April, and May to highlight our three main messages. Similar leave behinds as the ones on the screen before you were created for each month's advocacy effort. In March, we highlighted the need for an additional $381 million above the governor's January budget proposal to support efforts to close equity gaps and graduate a prepared workforce for California. In April, we focused on seeking an additional $900 million above the governor's January budget proposal to support our infrastructure and renewal projects. And in May, we had a targeted effort to highlight the staff salary study that was released late last month and the need for additional funds to support fair and equitable wages and benefits for our staff and faculty this year. The leave behinds were provided for local engagement by the campuses with their local delegation, so the case can be made while additional investments in their campuses and the CSU at large is so vital. This approach created multiple touch points over the past 3 months and created an opportunity to deliver our message to all 120 legislators. Additionally, we engaged in external community groups, such as the Chamber of Commerce's, equity groups, and community partners. We received over 20 letters of support for the CSU budget request, with many of those backers providing public support during the Assembly and Senate budget committees last week. As we look ahead in the final weeks of the budget process, we are well positioned. We continue to meet with key leaders and members of the legislature, and today we stand united with our legislative leaders and our students, faculty, staff, and alumni as we collectively wear our red construction vests with the CSU hashtag CSU for California, underscoring building California's future. That is exactly what the CSU does. The CSU builds the state's workforce, builds California middle class, and builds California infrastructure. The CSU is the economic engine that ensures California has a strong economy today and in the future. I would just like to highlight, just before I came in here, I already found that Senator Glazer and Senator Leyva both posted supporting the CSU and our budget requests, so hope to see more over the next coming days. So thank you for wearing your red vests, everyone. Okay. Now I'd like to turn to legislation. In order to put my presentation in context, I thought I would begin by highlighting key legislative deadlines. As you can see from the slide, the first policy deadline occurred at the end of last month. This means that for the bills that have advanced, they would have needed to pass out of a relevant policy committee prior to that date. Last week was another key legislative deadline relative to bills with a fiscal impact. Each House's Appropriations Committee held their suspense file and voted to advance bills in the legislative process. While many bills were passed off the suspense file and will continue in the legislative process, this is a key milestone as numerous bills were held and did not advance to the second House. By May 27th, bills must be passed out of the House where they were introduced. Once a bill reaches the second House, the committee process will repeat again. Overall, we're very pleased with where we stand as it relates to the legislative matters. Our team has worked diligently with legislators and their staff to take care of issues early in the process. I'd like now to provide you with specific updates as it relates to key legislation. Let's begin with our sponsored bills. AB 2422 by Assemblymember Kevin McCarty. In March, I provided an update on the support we received from the State Treasurer and our campuses in regard to the investment flexibility proposal. I'm pleased to announce that AB 2422 passed out of both the Assembly Higher Ed Committee and the Assembly Appropriations Committee and received a vote of 74-0 yesterday on the Assembly floor. Our other sponsored bill, Senate Bill 1280 by Senator Ben Wesso, which would authorize alcohol sponsorships at San Diego State's venues, also received bipartisan support with a vote of 33-0 and passed off the Senate floor yesterday. The final two sponsored bill proposals, the impaction proposal and the updating references to Humboldt State within the Ed Code to California State Polytechnic University Humboldt, or Cal Poly Humboldt, were both included in this year's omnibus bill, AB 2973. As expected, both bills passed out of its policy and fiscal committees in the Assembly and is currently sitting on the floor for a vote. During our next meeting, I'll provide another update on the progress of each bill, including an update on the sponsored Doctor of Public Health proposal, which we just approved. I'll now move to an update on some bills of interest to the CSU community. These past few years have seen increased legislative attention placed on the well-being of our students. This year is no different, with many bills focused on housing and food insecurity. To begin, I will highlight a couple of housing bills that I believe will be of interest to you. AB 1602 by Assemblymember McCarty would establish a $5 billion zero-interest revolving loan to qualifying CSU, UC, and community college campuses for the purpose of constructing affordable housing. I've presented this bill in the past and shared that with the bill will likely be incorporated into the budget given the significant investment needed to implement. Earlier this month, the Senate announced their budget plan and included the priorities, which included investments in student housing. The Senate has already provided an additional $1.5 billion above the $2 billion that was approved in last year's budget. We're still awaiting, The Assembly last week, during their Assembly Budget Subcommittee on Education Finance, which is chaired by Assemblyman McCarty, announced that student housing will be the top priority for the Assembly. We anticipate this bill will be further refined through the budget process, and therefore we have a pending position. AB 2459 by Assemblymember Cervantes originally was introduced to require the CSU, UC, and independent nonprofits to provide a minimum of 1-year housing guarantee for all freshmen and first-year transfer students. Due to cost concerns and implementation questions, the bill was recently amended to strike the housing mandate and instead require campuses to provide monthly and annual reporting of their student housing portfolio. Working with our colleagues in capital planning, design, and construction, we are still trying to understand the reporting requirements and the timing of the information being requested. We are actively engaged with the author's office and remain in a pending position while we continue to work with both the author and the staff. Shifting to bills that seek to support students struggling with food insecurity, I'd like to highlight Senate Bill 907 by Senator Richard Pan, which would require the Department of Social Services and the Department of Food and Agriculture to establish a non-competitive grant program designed to expand the use of EBT acceptance systems at farmers markets. This bill would make it easier for farmers markets to accept CalFresh food dollars, which provides two benefits: directly supports our local small and medium farmers, but also provides thousands of students with healthy and fresh food options. For these reasons, we have recently moved to a support position. AB 2652, also by Assemblymember McCarty, would require the Student Aid Commission to establish a state-funded food support pilot program, which would provide food assistance benefits to students who submit a California DREAM Act application. The intent is that this grant money would be used for students' basic needs and to provide a similar benefit as CalFresh, since undocumented students are not eligible for the federal program. Given the benefit this will create for so many of our students, we are pleased to support this measure. In the time since I actually prepared this script, we have learned that the bill was unfortunately held in the Appropriations Committee late last week. Financial aid reform is also discussion this year. Before we begin our discussion on AB 1746 by Assemblyman Medina, I'd like to highlight AB 2456, also by Assemblymember McCarty. I reported on this bill during our last meeting. The bill was originally introduced and would increase the number of units that students must take to receive a full-time Cal Grant from 12 units per semester to 30 units per year. While we're supportive of the author's intent to shorten the time to degree, we were concerned that the vast majority of our students would be disadvantaged, and this would ultimately limit access to essential financial aid. For these reasons, we took an opposed position in partnership with a strong group of student advocates and equity organizations. As a result, the bill was amended to incentivize Cal Grant students to take summer term courses without impacting their Cal Grant eligibility. We were then able to remove our opposition from the bill. Similar to the previous bill, AB 2456 was also held in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. Finally, I'd like to provide you with an update on AB 1746, co-authored by Assemblyman Medina and McCarty. As a reminder, this is the financial aid reform bill discussed during the March meeting. Since then, ASR has been working with our colleagues at Academic Student Affairs and Budget and Finance, and we have carefully analyzed the bill and the effects of the proposed changes to the Cal Grant program. Today, I'm joined by Noelia Gonzalez, System-Wide Director of Financial Aid Programs. Together, we'll be providing a high-level overview of the existing Cal Grant program, walk you through the changes being proposed under AB 1746, and highlight how the Middle Class Scholarship Program is intended to work in conjunction with the proposed changes. The CSU has been advocating for financial aid reform for several years. Throughout, we have maintained an insistence on the principle of do no harm, meaning that we should seek reforms to streamline the process, remove barriers to entry. We should seek reforms that expand access to financial aid without closing the door to others who currently rely on these dollars to achieve their academic goals. And we should provide equal access to aid for both first-time students at four-year institutions and transfer students alike. We have seen multiple bills in the past few years that have attempted to reform the state Cal Grant program, most recently AB 1456 by Assemblymember Medina, which was vetoed by the governor last year due to its ongoing budget impact. With each legislative effort, our aim was to engage with the authors to ensure our students would receive the maximum benefit of those reforms. I should also note that last year, the governor invested in Cal Grant by funding an expansion of the Middle Class Scholarship Program and removing the age and time out of high school barriers for accessing Cal Grant at the community college system. I'll now hand it over to my colleague, Director of Financial Aid Programs, Noelia Gonzalez.
Thank you, Eric. What does Assembly Bill 1746 do for our students? This bill would reorganize the multiple components of the current Cal Grant program into two programs. Cal Grant 2 for community college students, which would include a non-tuition access award of $1,648 per year for up to 4 years and removes the GPA requirement for eligibility. The Cal Grant 4 for four-year university students would provide only tuition coverage of $5,742 for 4 years and removes age and time out of high school eligibility requirements. A student would have a total of 4 years of Cal Grant eligibility, whether they use it all at a community college, all at a four-year university, or split in between. There are a number of elements in the proposal that we welcome, such as the simplification of eligibility criteria, provides a net gain in the number of students receiving tuition coverage, and all eligible CSU students would receive tuition coverage beginning their first year, closing the first-year Cal Grant B tuition gap and creating savings to the SUG program of approximately $80 million per year. With these positive gains AB 1746 proposes, it is also important to recognize the trade-offs, such as The bill significantly lowers the income eligibility threshold to be aligned with the federal Pell Grant, removes non-tuition awards for all CSU students, inclusive of first-year and transfer students, which equates to $1,648 per year for 4 years in direct aid to students. This equates to $187 million in student benefits for 113,847 non-tuition awards currently received by our students. To help illustrate the eligibility changes being proposed by AB 1746, this slide represents a comparison between the current Cal Grant program and the proposed income ceiling levels under AB 1746. Please note that Pell income eligibility is based on family size and federal poverty level calculations and is not reflective of the higher cost of living in California and does not take into account the cost variances in different regions of the state. As an example, I would like to draw your attention to the top line with the red circles. The maximum income level for a family of 4 with 2 married parents under AB 1746 would be $72,875. To put this in perspective, each parent would need to make less than $37,000 per year before taxes. To put a finer point on this threshold, each parent would not make more than $18 per hour. That's only $3 above the current minimum wage in California for their child to receive tuition assistance from the state. That is significantly less than the current maximum income for Cal Grant A of $116,800 for a family of 4. It should also be noted that this group of students represents 19% of the total number of CSU students receiving a Cal Grant. Under AB 1746, should either parent receive even a small raise, their income level would exceed the maximum threshold for receiving a Cal Grant. Students will need to meet the income level requirements every year in order to keep their eligibility. As we mentioned earlier, there are trade-offs under this proposal. One of those trade-offs is which future student would no longer be eligible for a Cal Grant. As we evaluate this proposal, it is important to understand who would be impacted by the changes proposed in AB 1746. To do this, we looked at the number of students who enrolled in 2020, 2021, and their family income to gauge the impacts of implementing AB 1746. Looking at new recipients for fall 2020, the CSU would gain a net gain of 7,166 students. We anticipate that there would be a gain of 17,077 newly eligible students through the expansion of the program. At the same time, we can expect to see 9,911 fewer students eligible for Cal Grant awards due to the lower income ceiling. When we projected future gains and losses using the 2020-2021 academic year enrollment data, we believe the number of students who would be eligible once AB 1746 is fully implemented is approximately 68,308 students. At the same time, the number of students who would not receive a Cal Grant award due to the change in income eligibility would be approximately 39,644 students. There would be a net gain of 28,664 students once the program is fully implemented after 4 years. As proposed, newly awarded students are those that were previously not eligible for the program due to age and time out of high school limits, so a population of older students. Those students who would no longer be eligible are those above the income eligibility threshold set at the Pell level. Our enrollment data shows that this group would be represented by first-time students whose parents have a combined income above $73,000 for a family of 4. The slide before you reflects the makeup of those students currently receiving a Cal Grant award, as represented by the blue bar. After factoring in the changes proposed by AB 1746, the following demographic makeup presents itself. The demographic makeup of CSU students after implementation of AB 1746 is denoted in the gray bar. As you can see, we anticipate little change in the demographic makeup of our students after implementing the changes to AB 1746. Another component of the financial aid reform discussion is the middle class scholarship program, which was recently recast by the legislature as non-tuition assistance to students. Unlike the Cal Grant program that provides a flat rate that is predictable year to year, the middle class scholarship will be providing funding of varying amounts. And unlike the Cal Grant program, the middle class scholarship is not an entitlement program. The law requires the California Student Aid Commission to determine what percentage of each student's remaining cost to cover each year based on the annual appropriation for the program. The latest percentage that we have heard is 24%. According to the Legislative Analyst's Office, a nonpartisan government agency that provides fiscal and policy advice to the California legislature, the amount of these middle-class scholarships awards will vary widely among students, with each student's award reflecting their costs and available resources. Because the calculation assumes an approximately $8,000 student contribution to their cost of attendance, our low-income students living at home will not be eligible for this new award, as their cost of attendance after Pell Grant, Cal Grant, and the $8,000 self-help amount will not be large enough to qualify for a non-tuition award. Here are a couple of examples to illustrate how the middle-class scholarship works with the proposed Cal Grant program. So in the green example, we have a student that's dependent. His or her parents are married and they have a family of 4. Their family income is $80,000, so their expected family contribution is $8,726. Under the current program, the student is not eligible for a federal Pell Grant. They are eligible for a Cal Grant A, so they receive $5,742. And then their middle class scholarship would be evaluated at 24% of the gap, so they would be receiving a $1,487 award. The student's total financial aid award would be $7,229. Under the proposed legislation of AB 1746, the student would not be eligible for a Pell Grant, would not be eligible for a Cal Grant. They would not be receiving a state university grant as their expected family contribution is too high, but they would be eligible for a middle class scholarship in the amount of $2,865. So their award is much less than under the current program. The second example in blue is an independent student who's single, family household size of 1, and their income is $30,000. Their expected family contribution would be $5,675. Their Pell Grant under the current program would be $1,245. They would be eligible for a Cal Grant B, which covers both the state university fee and the cost of the Access Award. So that's $5,742 plus a $1,648 to total $7,390. And then they would receive a middle class scholarship at the 24% of their gap for $4,291. Their total award would be $12,926. Under the proposed legislation of AB 1746, their Pell Grant would remain the same. They would receive a Cal Grant for $5,742, and then they would receive a middle class scholarship for 24% of the gap, which is $4,686. Their total award would be $11,673, which is still less than under the current program.
As we close, financial aid reform is very complicated with many moving parts. As noted at the top of this presentation, the CSU believes that any modernization of the Cal Grant program should do no harm. We agree with and are excited by some of the proposed recommendations contained within AB 1746, such as simplifying the eligibility criteria and remove the age and time out of high school restrictions for four-year institutions. Fund the first-year Cal Grant B tuition gap, which affects 73% of our total Cal Grant recipients, and which the CSU has historically covered with state university grant funds. But we also believe a student should not experience a drop in aid when they transfer to us from a community college. Currently, and under the new proposal, a student could exhaust all 4 years of Cal Grant eligibility at a community college level before they arrive to the CSU. We currently fund these students' tuitions with our student university grant funds. Additionally, students will receive a $1,648 non-tuition award while they are attending community college, but that non-tuition award from the state will disappear once that student transfers to a four-year university. As mentioned earlier, the Middle Class Scholarship is not an entitlement program. As proposed, the assumption that a student whose family income exceeds $73,000 will be covered by the Middle Class Scholarship is not a fully accurate statement. Presently, those students can rely on a Cal Grant that is stable and predictable for 4 years and covers the cost of their tuition. Under this proposal, the same student's financial aid would be a percentage of their need and would be subject to an annual appropriation by the legislature and the administration, putting at risk their financial aid and their access to an education. Should the state ever get to a point when the Middle Class Scholarship could be fully funded and develop a consistent track record, only then could we say that they are covered by this grant in a way similar to the Cal Grant. Until then, the recommendations for financial aid reform on the screen before you would provide a significant benefit for all of our students by providing a stable and predictable program that families and students can count on throughout their education journey. This concludes our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Steve and Eric and Noella, for your presentation. Noelle, yeah.
Noel, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Any questions? Romy?
I do have a question, Trustee. I'm sorry, I'm not in the room, so you can't see my red button, but I'll wait in line.
Oh, okay. Letitia, let's go with you first.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm curious. Thank you for the presentation, and it sounds like there's some exciting stuff. So I have kind of a two-part question. I'm curious, in the development of sort of this process, has there been feedback from the California Student Aid Commission on the numbers that we're presenting here today, and what's some of their thoughts about kind of where we are? And are we? Yeah, I'll start with that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we have been having meetings with the California Student Aid Commission. We've had several meetings. There is a slight difference in our numbers because our data is based on actual enrolled student data from the 2020-2021 academic year. And the information that the California Student Aid Commission has provided is based on applicant data. So all the students that submitted an application for financial aid.
That's helpful. And in some notes that, I sort of received a number of emails, as I'm sure a number of folks have on the board about this presentation. I'm curious to what you think, and if clearly I have a lot of learning to do in this space, what staff thinks about sort of more of an entitlement clause for low-income students as defined by federal Pell eligibility. Is that something that is possible?
If I understand,
prioritization.
yeah, if I can just ask for clarification, is the understanding that changing the federal definition of?
No, I mean, I think what the representative of the student group was asking, and it's simply a statement, so I'll just say it. We need entitlement for low-income students as defined by the federal Pell eligibility. And so I'm curious, again, learning about sort of where we are with the shift in numbers and prioritizing of population, and just kind of wanted what your thoughts on that statement. We need entitlement for low-income students as defined by the federal Pell eligibility.
Thank you for that clarification. I think making it an entitlement program provides security. I believe the understanding was that the middle class scholarship would backfill any of those students that would no longer be eligible due to the higher income limits due to the change in AB 1746. But given that the middle class scholarship is an annual appropriated fund, it doesn't create that security, that entitlement that I think you're referencing. And so it'd be our preference that if we're going to make any reforms to the Cal Grant program, it should be sustainable and predictable, and for families and students to plan so they know what they can receive from year over year and not wonder or guess if they're going to go to school the following year. So I think we would agree with you in that regards. I'm just not sure how this legislation would get there, but it's a solid point for sure.
And could the CSU, both the board and or, can we advocate for any amendments that would sort of further opportunities for entitlement?
Yeah.
It's definitely something that we've asked for, we've sought, we'll continue to ask for. It is important to understand that this is a significant budget ask, and everything needs to fall within a line of the conversation around the budget. So it's not as straightforward or as simple as just a conversation on this one bill. There's other components that we have to keep in mind, but your point is well taken.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I just really appreciate the presentation. I know this is I'm kind of speaking out of turn and for quite long here. But as you know, our students in San Francisco have very different needs as our students in Fresno have very different needs as our students in LA, and they're all struggling. So this lift up is extremely important in this moment. So thank you so much for the advocacy and for the partnerships with our legislative family in Sacramento and moving this stuff forward. So thank you.
Romy and then Wenda.
I have, I hope, what is a quick question on 3 bills. One is AB 1467, the sexual assault counselors. Our position is pending, and I assume that's because it is an unfunded mandate. Then my next question is regarding AB 1733, the Open Meetings Act. This would modernize the Berkeley-Keene Open Meeting Act. This meeting is a good example. It is my understanding that we have other trustees participating remotely, only allowed temporarily during our COVID pandemic. And if this law doesn't pass, then it would not be possible in the future. However, I think we did business quite well, and also the public comment is expanded if people don't have to travel down to Long Beach just to speak for 1 minute. So I wonder why our position is tracking and not support. And lastly, AB 1796, the re-enrollment. And our position here is neutral. That bill would require us to grant students easy enrollment or automatic enrollment within 5 years of them withdrawing from our campuses. And we have such an active and re-enrollment program. We have such a great desire to bring our students back into the fold that I wonder why our position is neutral on that bill and not in support.
Thank you. I'll start with the last one first. So AB 1796 is neutral because many of our campuses are already doing this. So if I remember correctly, I believe we have, yes, we don't have any timeout provision for any student that wants to return back to the CSU. So really the bill is already, in a way, codifying practice of the CSU, so which is why we have a neutral position.
Can I clarify? It would even limit it, right? If we have campuses that have no timeout, this bill would actually hindering re-enrollment if it's longer than 5 years.
That's correct.
Okay, then we should oppose it maybe.
I don't think we want to oppose it. I think what we have is we're continuing to work with the author's office just to make sure they understand how we operate. That's always a lot of what we do is education. Okay. And so we'll continue to do that. But for now, we have a neutral position.
Thank you.
With regards to AB 1750, or is it 1733? 1733. This bill actually was held in the Appropriations Committee last week. We're having conversations with the governor's office to see if we can expand an executive order or look at opportunities for expansion of how open meetings like this occur, especially around clarification and designation of location. But otherwise, this particular vehicle is the only vehicle in the legislature right now, so our only opportunity is through the governor's office. So we'll begin those dialogues given that the bill was held last week. And I apologize, I didn't get the first bill.
1467 sexual assault counselors, and the question was whether this is an unfunded mandate.
It would be an unfunded mandate. We actually have been working with the author's office quite extensively, and we're pleased to say that they've accepted many of our amendments on this bill. We do have a couple of outstanding concerns related to counselors' independence from Title IX officers in this particular bill, and we'll continue to keep working with on that, but it would impose a cost. It's not defined yet what that cost would be, but it would certainly increase the types of programming and services that we would offer, parallel to what many of the programs that we do already offer.
Thank you for your answers.
So we got Wenda, Julia, Yami, and Crystal. So Wenda.
Thank you. So I would just like a status update on 2 Senate bills and 1 Assembly bill. So the first one is SB 641, CalFresh for College Students Act. And the second is SB 785, California Promise Program for CSU students. And then finally, Assembly Bill 1625, which is regarding our student trustees.
Terrific. Senate Bill 641 regarding CalFresh, we have a support position on that bill. Very pleased to support that. It would codify recommendations from the College Hunger Working Group, and more importantly, it would provide data and information for tracking purposes to know who's receiving CalFresh benefits. So we're pleased to support Senate Bill 641.
So Eric, I guess what I'm asking is, where are we in terms of the timeline? I know that we're supporting it, but the bill is awaiting hearing in the Assembly Human Services Committee. I was wondering if that committee has met yet?
It has not. So the policy hearings are scheduled for June. So we have a little time. So we're in kind of in a little window, so to speak. So what's happening right now is on the Senate and the Assembly are taking floor votes, and then any bills that pass off of the floor are going to sit for a couple of weeks, and then policy hearings will begin up in June.
Okay, and is that the same thing with 785?
That is correct.
And Assembly Bill 1625?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
That was an easy one.
Yami.
Thank you so much for your presentation and for all the information. I really appreciate it. I do have a question. For me, it's, I've always thought about the need for Cal Grant reform, especially when it comes to our most marginalized students, those that are most impacted, low income. I know that in reading AB 1746, I was under the understanding that that's who it would very much impact. And my question is, I know the numbers that you put up showed zeros for the SUG dollars. Is there potential for us as a CSU system to rethink how we administer those SUG dollars?
Do you want to explain why there are zeros there for the program, and then we can talk about policy changes?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the reason there was zero was because if a student is receiving a Cal Grant fee-paying portion grant, they're not eligible to receive another fee-paying portion or fee-paying award. So the state university grant currently pays the state university fee. That was for one. For the other, it's because the expected family contribution was just higher. Typically, we will award students state university grant that apply on time, so that by that March 2nd deadline, and have an expected family contribution under $4,000. Some campuses can go a little bit higher depending on their campus population, but one of those students had an expected family contribution of, I think, $8,700, and that was too high for state university grant.
And I think as we look at 1746, I think we also have to realize that we may have to come back and look at our SUG program to ensure that the most vulnerable are protected. Yeah. So what that looks like, we haven't gone down that road yet. I think we'll wait and see how 1746 unfolds as this legislative session concludes. But I think that is definitely something that's on the table for discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Crystal.
Thank you, team, for making such a comprehensive report. I really do appreciate the thoroughness and the pros and cons, and really just a comprehensive presentation. So I commend you both. I had some questions regarding the new Pell grant. I won't be continuing my education next year as undergrad, so I won't be receiving Pell, but I'm under the understanding that Pell Grant will have new, instead of EFC, it will be SAI. Can you run down what that means? And let's say, I'm still trying to understand SAI. So what does that mean for a student who makes $30,000 under EFC versus SAI? Do they get more aid? Do they get less aid? Can you just explain a little bit?
So the SAI stands for Student Access Index, Student Aid Index, that's what it is, Student Aid Index. It will not go into effect until the 2024-2025 academic year. So we still have a couple years for the Department of Education. They've delayed it by a year. So initially it was going to be for 2023-2024, but they've delayed it for a year because they're still also trying to make sure that they have all their programming. But a student, what I've read so far from all of our organizations and from the department is that it won't change a student's award that much unless there is more funding to the Pell Grant program. So, you've probably heard at the federal level, there's double the Pell. There's, I know President Biden just increased the Pell Grant. So the Student Aid Index and the expected family contribution are very similar. The awards amounts would be the same unless there is an increase to the Pell Grant appropriation by the federal government.
A follow-up question to that, would that mean that there'd be more Pell awards to students, or it'd be the same amount?
We have not yet looked at the increase of possible awards. There have been some studies that for some populations, I think the older independent students may see an increase in terms of the number of Pell Grants is what I've read, but we haven't looked yet at our own population.
Okay. Thank you for answering those questions because I know we used EFC, and so I wanted to understand. So thank you for clarifying. It doesn't make that much of a difference. My second question is, I was wondering if the bill, both the middle class scholarship increase in allocation as well as the Cal Grant bill, does that include funding towards the CSU for financial aid as well?
Just make sure I understand, like a direct appropriation to the CSU for that purpose?
Yes.
It does not.
Does not, okay. Thank you. That's all my questions for now.
Maria.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for your work, the entire ASR office, and Maggie White. I know she's back there working really hard in Sacramento. First, a question about AB 2464 and then Cal Grant reform. So that bill we are opposing, is there a reason why we're opposing it? Would you be able to explain?
Sure. 2464, this is one of those bills we've come across from time to time where the policy itself is not what we're opposing as much as we're opposing the fact that this is something that normally is addressed during the collective bargaining agreement. And what we generally don't approve of and we generally oppose are bills that are seeking to negotiate collective bargaining terms outside the collective bargaining arrangement. So when they go to the legislature to seek terms on what should be collectively bargained, we generally oppose those proposals.
Okay, so that's helpful. So I know that the CSU has said in open session meetings in the past that we shouldn't have legislators drafting bills kind of imposing on our educational system. Same thing happens with community colleges. They've mentioned the same thing in their open sessions. Yes, I watch both meetings. So if we don't want them imposing a bill and we know that there's this issue that they're bringing up, right, which we've heard in public comment in these meetings as well, then what are we doing to make sure that we address this now? And I know that maybe you're already in discussion and you may not be able to share it, but is there anything we're doing to address this on our own so that it's not imposed on us through legislation?
Well, I don't know in this or any other case how we can avoid that. We can have our conversations. I know this particular item was part of what was submitted, and it was taken off the table for discussions and then later submitted as legislation. So it's difficult to prevent something like that. We can continue to have conversations, but frankly, we can only operate within the resources that we have, and we can collectively bargain to try to find mutually agreed upon solutions to whatever those problems are. We just prefer that they not do that through legislation, so because the legislation doesn't take into account our limited resources. So, but we'll continue to talk with our labor partners on issues, and we'll continue to do that. That isn't a problem. If this is an item that wants to be brought back, we'll continue to have that talk.
That would be amazing. Thank you. Now, if I may, regarding Pell Grant. Thank you. Okay, so I think you mentioned for AB 1746, the data that the CSU used was for actual enrolled students, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so then CSAC and all the other organizations who are advocating for AB 1746, they used applicant data?
Correct. The Student Aid Commission used the application data that they have in their system. They do not have the enrollment data.
Right.
Okay, so if we were to use the applicant data instead of the enrollment data, how would the numbers change?
We don't have all the access to all the applicant data because the applicant data is a student that has said they want to attend a CSU on their FAFSA. We do not have that information unless the student actually has applied for admissions and has been admitted. So we don't collect all the FAFSAs or the California DREAM Act applications that are submitted in the state. We only collect the information for the students that are our students.
Okay. And I don't know if any trustees are feeling the way I'm feeling, but I feel like I'm missing something. There's like this big gap in the middle. CSAC and all the other CSA, all the other organizations, which by the way, thank you for all of your hard work if you're watching this meeting, have very different numbers than what the CSU provides, which makes sense because we're using different data. But I also feel like Senator Leyva and Assemblymember Medina are two of our strongest advocates in Sacramento for students. So I don't feel like they would create a bill that would further marginalize students that they're already always advocating for. So what am I missing? I feel like I'm getting two different sets of information. And like Trustee Simon, I'm also getting emails. And so I just want to make sure that we're supporting our most marginalized students.
No, I appreciate it, and we are too. What I think we have to keep in mind is that the program is very clear in that it's expanding the program and it's also lowering the income threshold to participate in the program. And when you look at who's no longer going to be eligible for Cal Grant going forward, that's a number of our population that currently exists. And so what we haven't seen in the promotion and the advertising and the advocacy is the loss. Who's no longer going to be eligible for the program. All we're simply doing is sunshining what that looks like to the CSU. So I don't think there's anything competing or different. It's just we're just sunshining what we see as the number of students that would no longer be eligible. I think we're fairly close with the numbers. Mind you, we've had a lot of conversation with CSAC to try to understand the difference between enrollment and application. And we feel like our numbers are fairly consistent. That was a big challenge we felt last year, was data was really difficult to get our hands around. But I think we've done a great job this year of trying to really understand where each agency is coming from, what each agency is looking at. I think we've got a fairly good understanding right now, but the only difference I would say that from what's being promoted about 1746 is that we're just simply sunshining that there are going to be a number of students that will no longer be eligible when you go from 116,000 to 76,000 in eligibility. That is a large gap of students that currently receive Cal Grant that going forward will not. The assumption is that the middle class scholarship will pick up that grouping of students. But the middle class scholarship is not fully funded to ensure that the same level of funding will continue with those students going forward. And given that the middle class scholarship is an annual appropriation, there's no guarantee from year to year that that grant will be available like the Cal Grant program does today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for answering my questions. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Julia.
Thanks. Well, first I want to thank Eric and Noelia. They've done just incredible work digging into what it really means. Like you, Maria, I think the framework, the Cal Grant framework, is a very attractive notion, and it's supported by the advocates because it would expand eligibility, as we said, particularly to older students. We've talked about that. It would take away the age limit as well as the high school graduation time limit. So that should happen. I mean, we want that to happen. But it's also true that there is a trade-off, and they did the trade-off for budget reasons. They've got to keep the budget, it's already a big number. So they at least acknowledge that to do that, you tie it to Pell Grants. Well, the problem with Pell Grants, besides the fact that it's a national program meant for 50 states that that have lower cost of living, lower wages, and so forth. When you get to Pell Grant in California, as Noelia said, a family that's making, two workers making $18 an hour full-time, barely make the Pell eligibility. If they get a raise to $20 an hour, they're out. That's the reality for California. That's the problem with tying ourselves to the Pell Grant. So to Latifah's question, there's no reason why everybody on Pell couldn't be a Cal Grant eligible. If it simplifies it to say, if you are eligible for Pell, now that we're doing away with the high school limitations and the age limitations, which the state had, then we can bring everybody who's Pell eligible into the Cal Grant program. The problem is we shouldn't stop there. We at California should also say, it's not just Cal Grant period that determines the Cal Grant eligibility, the Pell Grant eligibility, not Pell Grant period that should determine the Cal Grant eligibility. Let's do Cal Grant and then determine what is the right level for Pell Grant and what other income levels to bring in almost 20% of our students. You said 19% of our students would be left out. So we got to figure out how we include those who would be left out right now. It's the reason most Pell Grant students right now that aren't eligible for Cal Grant are for reasons that we established. They were either too old, or they had used their Cal Grant money already. They're 5th and 6th year students. So it's not like we couldn't just accept everybody in Pell Grant and then ask the authors to consider establishing income eligibility standards that are more realistic for California families. 80, 90, 100,000, whatever would be more realistic, so that students and so that families and their students can actually benefit for this and make college affordable for them. I mean, so that's, to me, I think there's a conversation to be had that hasn't been had so far. And I think that's important. I think that's what Eric and Noelia have put a spotlight on. It's not opposing what's going on. It's to say there are implications to what's going on. There's serious trade-offs. There are families and students who are going to get left out in our population that we think should not be left out. And that's why we are continuing to work with the authors and the advocacy people. On the sub-grant, I just want to expand on that, because that's the other thing. They say, well, you should reform your sub-grant. Yes, of course we should. I think Eric's quite correct. We should see how this falls out, and then we can figure out how to maximize financial aid for our students. The problem is, the way it stands now, we would be potentially picking up all the access awards that are going away from Cal Grant B for, 113,000 students right now? They're going to lose that aid.
Yes.
We could potentially be picking up tuition for college, for transfers who exhausted their Cal Grant 2 before they even got to the CSU. we could potentially be looking at students who are in their 5th and 6th year, first-time freshmen who take 5 or 6 years to graduate, because Cal Grant is only 4 years. The point I'm trying to make is there's going to be a lot of demand on that SUG grant. And the important point is it's limited money. The money that we have for SUG is a limited amount of money that comes from the increases in tuition. It's a third of the increases in tuition. And remember, when was the last time we increased in tuition? 2 years. A long time ago. So that part is constrained, and there's a lot of demand for that. That's why it's really important that we sit down and fully understand the implications of all this money. It's devilishly complicated. I'm sure you all are tired of hearing about this by now. But I think Eric and Noelia, talking to the Student Aid Commission, and importantly, talking to the sponsors, because I do believe they want what's best for our students, so that they fully understand that it's not as simple as saying we're going to get 30,000 more students under Cal Grant, and they're going to be Latino or Latinx and Africa. It's not that simple. It really has real life implications. It's almost as bad as trying to reform the tax code, to be honest. All right, so I'll stop with that.
On that positive note.
I know. So I applaud the staff. They've done a lot of hard work. I hope the board has a better understanding of how complicated it is. And I hope that everybody who's listening to this out there in the universe hears that it's not that we're being oppositional, is that we have some real concerns about how this benefits or not our students and what's the best course of action.
Okay, Crystal.
Thank you so much, Chair. I wanted to also discuss and agree with some points that you said, Julia. I agree that we shouldn't harm our middle class students. I do not want that at all. And, you know, I personally would like to see more numbers about how SUG can be reformed to support our middle class students, because it is an intricate web dealing with the tax code, financial aid. And so it all works together. And I would like to see further numbers on what are the different plans, much like how CSAC did different plans of funding for legislature about different modes of how to reform Cal Grant. I would like to see different modes of how can SUG be used. Can SUG close the gap between our middle class students? Because for me, I also don't want to harm our middle class students. I also understand that the middle class scholarship is not an entitlement. And so I would like to understand, how can SUG fill in the gaps or not? And so I'd be interested in that data. Thank you.
Maria.
Okay, so are there any other institutions, like, I know you see we can't make them do anything, but are they opposing this? And then what about community colleges?
I believe community colleges in support. I think their students are the largest benefactors in this, given some of the changes. We have not taken a position on this bill, and I do not believe the UC has taken a position on this bill.
Okay. Could we find out about the UC, and then would you mind emailing me? I just don't want to be the only institution opposing it. I think that there's more work to be done, and I do appreciate everything you both are doing. I know you work around the clock. Eric, I've seen you. I appreciate you so much. And I know that we keep bringing up CSAC, which I appreciate a lot, but can we please continue to include CSSA and their staff?
Sure.
They are the official voice of students, so I want to make sure that they feel heard.
In fact, we actually had the Student Association in a meeting with us with CSAC, so we've been keeping them involved as best we can. And just to clarify, we're not in oppose.
Yes, I saw. But the way the conversations were going, I just want to make sure students know we're not opposing.
Correct.
But we're trying to do more work.
That's correct.
Where you need me, you tell me, and I will help you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Any other comments, questions? Okay. Sorry. Let me just, I I thought I turned that off. One comment on the red vests. I think every year at this time we anxiously await to see what new goodie we get, and hopefully this has some benefit. It's been impressive, and the imagination is great. So congratulations on doing that. I did allow Romy to ask questions, even though he was not wearing a red vest and was unique in that aspect among the trustees. So the other thing I wanted to say is to echo Steve's comments about Crystal, and congratulations. Your knowledge of all these bills and actions and comments and questions have been really wonderful. So it was very, very impressive. Romy and Maria and I went up to Bakersfield graduation this weekend to partly honor Crystal, who was the last in the group to walk because of her experiences here, and got a great ovation. And President Zelezny puts on a great party and a great graduation. So thank you for that. So with that, Chair Kimball, that concludes the business of the Committee on Governmental Relations.
Thank you,